Aloha to the Lahui. Welcome back to Connect the Dots with Jenny. We are discussing the Diddy trial. I know it's over, but we're going to kind of do a breakdown now that everything's done and the dust is settled. Let's discuss what's going to happen next. Let's discuss what has already happened and let's kind of break some of that down. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about, first of all, I think the prosecution brought a weak case. And I think the charges that they were going after was really weak. I haven't looked into what kind of charges they could have brought, but I know that the feds, federal is different from state, and they were wanting to bring federal type of charges. So I don't know what kind of charges those things are that they could have gotten, but like, I was thinking like domestic violence, right? They have proof of domestic violence. He was caught with guns. Like, is there federal charges in regards to that? In regards to the possession of guns? Is there federal charges in regards to the amount of drugs that was found at his house? You know what I'm saying? So to me, it just seems really, really fishy about the charges that they were trying to get Diddy on versus all the stuff that we've been hearing in the media. For instance, that he had these freak offs and there's all these celebrities and all these people and there's children, and there was none of that there. It was just a really highly sensationalized trial about Diddy's sex life, which I do not feel it was just about domestic violence and all those things. My point of that is just saying I feel like they could have done a better job of, if they really wanted to get him on other charges that would have absolutely been able to find him on. You know what I'm saying? And so even when I read, I forget what the name of this sheet is. Oh, it's I'm pretty sure it's the charge sheet, actually. Let me look it up really quick. Sorry. Yeah, right here. The verdict sheet, right? It says count one, racketeering conspiracy. How do you find the guilty not guilt? How do you find the defendant guilty not guilty? And then underneath there it says you have to, there's different acts: kidnapping, arson, bribery, and under each act you write, was it not proved or proved, right? So they had kidnapping, arson, bribery, witness tampering, forced labor, sex trafficking, acts involving transportation for purpose of prostitution, and drug distribution. And then the sex trafficking acts was sex trafficking specifically on Cassie Ventura, and then sex trafficking on Jane Doe. And I just feel like the prosecution just did a really poor job and the types of charges that they brought out, instead of finding another angle of where they could have really solidified a guilty verdict, you know. So I've been hearing a lot about the term a show trial, and I believe that. So I don't, if you don't know what a show trial is, which is basically, it's like a trial that's for show. Everybody knew Diddy got arrested. Everybody was accusing him of these freak offs and whatnot. And so like everything that was provided to the public was wasn't as big as we thought it was, because the things that are bigger aren't being brought to light because it's going to harm people who are higher up. Okay, that's an assumption, right? That's what a show trial, which the more I watched it, I remember being really hopeful, and the more I watched it, I was just like, man, really, this is it? Jane Doe is your big one? Like, there was so many holes in her story, man. She was like, I'm so in love with Diddy. She was so in love. All she wanted was time alone with him. And I was like, what are you guys doing? So, anyways, that's just my take on the prosecution. Now, what I would like to hope to see is what this trial did is it named Christina Koram a lot. My hope is that simultaneously there's a whole nother federal uh, investigation that's happening that as this was over here showing us this, there's a whole nother one in the background that's getting all these moving pieces. That's my hope, right? That they're now that KK has been named all over the whole trial, now they have the evidence they need to proceed to go after KK. Now they can get the subpoenas for KK. You know what I'm saying? So now they can start gathering evidence for a RICO, an actual RICO case with them. Now you can go get Fahim, start building that case with RICO, which will be like way more solid, right? That's my hope. My hope, sorry, I'm just writing something down. My hope is that that is happening and that they're going to come back with stronger charges. But, you know, there is a conspiracy theories that is like, this was just to suffice the public because actually they can't really let us know about everything, like all the higher ups and the elites that could possibly be named and involved and possibly be brought into this. So they just showed us this trial to prevent a bigger thing from happening. I want to continue to have hope in our justice system, right? That going now that we're moving right along to the justice system. The jury, I was very happy with the jury. So I don't know if you guys saw my other videos, but basically on Tuesday, the jury sent out a note that said, hey, we've already gotten the verdicts on counts 2 through 5, but we are like split down the middle on the RICO count, on the RICO charge, which means half thought we were guilty and the other half didn't. And so they basically said, what do we do? And the judge met with the prosecution and defense, and they were just like, just read them the instruction again, you know, and let them deliberate. And they brought the jurors back out and sat them down, and the judge basically said, go back and deliberate. And so there wasn't any clear cut. I think they were asking for help. I think they were asking for more clarification to help them to be a little bit more definitive on what to do and say next. But instead, it was just kind of this really vague, like nothing. They're just like, go back and deliberate. There's no other jury that's going to be able to have an easier time. So just go ahead and do your job. And I think that's where they kind of messed up. I think there's 2 ways that it was messed up with the jury. So that's the first way. I think the judge maybe should have gone back through, reread the instructions one more time, asked the jury maybe even if they had any clarifying questions that they wanted to ask that could be answered. But instead they were just like, go back and deliberate. And so, which leads me into the second reason that I think that affected the decision. And so they were not going to have court on Thursday, today, or tomorrow for the holiday weekend, for the 4th of July weekend. And so it was going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Well, they didn't know this though. If they couldn't reach a verdict on Wednesday, the judge was going to bring them back in on Thursday, today, so that they could continue deliberating, okay? And then they would have Friday off. They didn't know that. They thought they only had until Wednesday. Or, I mean, they would have to continue and come back next week, right? And so I believe that they rushed their decision because they didn't want to have to go into the 4th of July weekend. I think that they were trying to make sure that they were done before the 4th of July. And that's why the side that thought he was guilty was easily swayed to go over to the side that thought he was not guilty on the RICO charge. It all came down to they've been sitting in that courtroom for 7 weeks. They were over it. They're done. It's going to be the holiday. They want to spend time with their family. They're looking at possibly, oh man, if we don't got it today, then we're going to have to come back tomorrow. And then what's going to happen? To me, this is what I think the judge should have done. I think the judge should have said on Monday, this is going to be a holiday weekend. So let's start deliberations on Monday, July 7th. And I think that would have given the jury time to be with their family, time to be, because you got to remember, they cannot be watching TV. They cannot be on their phones. They cannot be reading the news. They cannot be on their social media. They cannot talk to their family or friends about this. Yet this thing is the only thing that's consuming their lives for 7 weeks. And so now potentially, oh man, it's going to get pushed back further. No, get me out of here. I want to go. So then what happens? The jury gets swayed a little bit easier. And it's like, man, I honestly believe that if they just moved it to July 7th, and they gave him a little bit more clarification, they would have had a different verdict. Because, hello, how are you going to say that they're guilty for the transportation of prostitution for Cassie and Jane, but not that they're guilty of sex trafficking? Make that make sense. Not the prostitution, but not sex trafficking. Anyways, moving right along. I think it hurt the prosecution that it was 6 white women. Even though this wasn't a race thing, it was a race thing. And I think Diddy was smart that he had a variety of ethnicities in his and sexes, men and women. His legal team was very strategic. Putting together that team was very intentional. He had women on that team. He had men. Versus the prosecution were 6 white women. Who, from the sounds of everything I've been hearing from, people who were reporters in the courtroom, they just didn't seem like they were relatable and that the jury could relate to them. So it just looked like a table of 6 white women who are kind of just attacking a man versus Diddy had like a variety of people, right? So that's something that can impact, like, I don't know if you guys know, but there was the closing arguments for the defense. And then after that, which apparently, reading it versus hearing it in person, you don't have the tonality in reading a text. And I read all the testimonies, but I wasn't there. But a lot of the content creators and reporters I watched, they say that it was different for them to actually be in the courtroom than what it is that they were reading the testimony. And they said that just Mark Agnifilo is very relatable, charming, disarming, very relatable. And so he had the jury laughing in his closing arguments. And then after that, Maureen Comey came in after that, and she was just kind of this really rigid white woman who couldn't relate to them. And this is literally the rebuttal of his closing argument. And just her tone and everything was just kind of like, the jury, from reports that I had watched, the jury just wasn't feeling Maureen Comey. And we're all humans. We're all humans, right? And so everybody's going to be different. Everybody has their own perspectives. And if the majority of the jury don't relate to Maureen Comey, then what happens when you talk to people you don't relate to? Your ears shut off. You just kind of stop listening. So I think that hurt. I think that is what hurt getting a guilty verdict. Let's talk about, wrong charges, all the wrong charges, wrong charges. So anyways, right now, what we're waiting on next is sentencing. As you know, the judge denied his bail, so it's going to be October 3rd. However, on July 8th, they're going to have a hearing. They're going to have a hearing on Tuesday. It's not really super clear as to what that hearing on Tuesday is going to be. It's going to be remote, so nobody's actually going to attend court. But they're going to have that meeting on Tuesday. And then after that, they want to move up. Diddy's team wants to move up the sentencing, rightfully so, right? Because Diddy's obviously going to be sitting in jail all the way up until sentencing. So they don't want it on October 3rd. They want it as soon as possible. So July 8th is when they're supposed to come with their proposal on the sentencing, because the prosecution wants it to start at 51 months and the defense wants it to start at 21 months. So what does that mean? That means Diddy got found guilty of 2 charges, right? The Mann Act, which is the transportation for the purpose of prostitution. So for the maximum sentence on that one charge is 10 years, and the maximum, so he got 2 charges. So he's looking potentially max could be 20 years, okay? So what they're saying is that they want to start each charge. The defense wants 21 months, right? Which is almost 2 years. So like 2 to 3 years. The prosecution wants to start at 51 months. 12, 24, 36, 48. So like about 4 or 5 years. So they wanted to start at 4 or 5 years. Okay. So we'll see. That's July 8th is when they're going to determine when the sentencing is going to be. The judge is the only person who determines what the sentencing is. He takes all kinds of things into factor, like Diddy's criminal history. Now that he has listened to the whole case, he's obviously going to take into factor in the things he's heard. And then he's ultimately the one who's going to make the final decision. The judge has not really been letting Diddy slide. Like every single bail and bond has been denied. So they're pushing to give him the least amount, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the judge is going to give Diddy. You know what I'm saying? He's been pretty. So perfect example here was when he got the verdict came through, and then instantly the defense wanted Diddy to walk that day. And then they're like, oh, let's put it together, this bail proposal. And the judge is like, yeah, put it together. And then the judge came out and denied it, right? Now, in the meantime, so what he did is he told them, okay, you guys go figure out your stuff, proposes, we're going to reconvene at 5 p.m. So they come back to reconvene. Okay, that's where they make the final decision. But in between that time, he received letters from Cassie's lawyer asking for Diddy not to be, released on bail because of the danger that Cassie feels from him and for all the witnesses. And then Deontay Nash, who is another guy who had testified, he wrote a letter. And then, but here's what I find so interesting is when the judge came out and the judge denied the bail, he used Mark Agnifalo's words against him. So what happened was, one of the things Maureen Comey said was, Diddy got raided in March of 2024. Per testimony on the stand from Jane Doe, as of June 2024, she got beat by Diddy. So Maureen Comey's whole thing was, hey, listen, look, he already knows that the U.S. government is looking at him. And look, he couldn't even control himself to his brazenness. He couldn't even stop himself from committing domestic violence to Jane Doe, right? And when Agnifalo was giving his closing arguments, he said, this is a domestic violent dispute. No doubt about it. I feel bad for Cassie. She got beat. For Jane, they got beat. So when it came time for the bail to be denied, he used Mark Agnifalo's words against him. I was like, you said he's dangerous, domestic violence. So for that reason, I cannot release him. Catch-22, double-edged sword. Isn't that so interesting? Anyways, that's all for the Diddy news right now. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked what I have to say, hit that subscribe button. I really appreciate it. I'm covering all the Diddy stuff because Maui Police Chief John Pelletier has been named in a Diddy lawsuit, and absolutely nothing was done about it. The Maui Police Commission did absolutely nothing. They refused to open up an independent review or investigation even into the validity of the lawsuit. So I'm here to make sure it stays alive and well, and I bring to you guys all the factual news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful night. Aloha.